Welcome back to the Bitcoin Reformation Podcast, I think our first in this new year, 2026. And so we are so glad to have you here. Usually three pastors, but today two, and maybe David will give us a little bit of an update on how that number might be two for a time being, who love Jesus and yes, Bitcoin too. The fun thing I'll share before I throw it over to you, David, from our house, two things. One, with kids in Christmas, I mean, the kids are 4, 2, and 7 months. So the Christmas joy is so real at the smallest things. So Silas got a football this year for Christmas, and he opened it up, picked it out of the box, put it in the air like this, and looked at it like it was the Holy Grail that he had just discovered and got, and was like, wow, ball. And then he also had the same reaction for a dollar tube of like bathtub paint soap. Like, oh wow. Amazing. It's like, man, if only to have the joy of little kids in that way on Christmas. And in some ways, we do. It's just different in that way. I mean, there's nothing better than celebrating the fact that Jesus comes down into our mess as one of us to save us. And that's the best joy I think we might ever have this side of eternity. But the other fun story, I had backed or was a Kickstarter backer for the Thank God for Bitcoin book. The Orange Umbrella is what the book is called. And I finally got that copy over since we've last recorded. And inside of it, I had them write for Zoe, Silas, and Judah with the hope of Jesus and Bitcoin. And then I've read it to Zoe once right away when we got it. She sat through, and it's a rather long book. I don't necessarily think 4 years old is probably the target age group, probably more like 8 or 10, if you will. The color, I mean, the pictures are beautiful, but the language and the words are really big. But then she even wanted to read it again. So she found it off the shelf, a couple weeks later and said, hey, Daddy, can you read me The Orange Umbrella? And I was like, wow, this is really cool. Like she likes this book that doesn't really talk about Bitcoin, but very clearly from my perspective as a person who, thinks about these things, the messaging is all sort of there subtly underneath at times and maybe more direct in others. But that was a really cool moment, at least as a dad who wants to impart the importance of what is money, what is a good store of value for rainy days, if you will, using the language of umbrella and all those sort of things. So that's what's going on, trying to get back into the swing of the new year. And, it's January, but I'm already thinking about Lent, and we're thinking about strategic planning. And so trying to send some emails for people who do that is, hey, if we're doing this, what do we think? What should we start thinking? Budget for next year, all these sort of things. So as they say, time never stops. There's always the next thing. But most of those things are all exciting, good, optimistic, hopeful, et cetera, et cetera. So what's going on in your world, David? And then tell us about Ben.
Yeah, in my world, the 2 college kids are back to school. We had a good break with them, and the 2 high schoolers have a 3rd week of break right now, which is sort of abnormal for high school, except for when you live in resort town and there's a lot of resort jobs. It's a thing here, although we just have no snow.
I
Only
was going to
finally
say,
now in the last week has it gotten cold enough for them to blow snow and for it to stick, but only a few runs open. So it's kind of been it's been great for hiking, I gotta say that, but it has been terrible for the restaurants and the hotels and the timeshares and the ski hills. So that touches a lot of people locally. So we're hoping for maybe big snow big come. Um, but let's see. In terms of childlike joy at our house tree, we've got the older kids, 21, the birthday cycles starting up. So we had 2 ends of the spectrum. To get that childlike joy, I'd have to go to what I claimed was the best gift under the whole tree, and that was from dog Moki. On a hike about a week before Christmas, I picked up a stick from the woods. She loves fetching sticks and frolicking with sticks. She just loves them, and I wrapped that up, and she approach that stick for the Christmas tree like a child with a tube of paint
that's
or a prize
awesome.
football. So I'm still gloating over the rest of the family for having accomplished that. But then our kids are at the other end. What do you get them? And any more these days it's clothing. But we had a big Christmas. we've long dreamed, Megan and I, long dreamed, and then we carried out, or in the midst of carrying out that dream now, that here is our oldest will be graduating in May, before he kind of launches and his scheduling. We're dipping into deep savings and taking a trip with the kids to Europe summer. So I've only
Oh,
been
cool.
once, 6, 7 years ago. My wife, that was only her second time, once in high school, to Italy, but we're taking, and our kids never. So we're going to Italy, a little bit of Austria, and southern Germany in June. So very excited about
Cool.
that. We got these little fake passport books from Amazon, and then put the whole itinerary inside in each one of them, and they all opened it at the same moment. And boy number two, Levi, before he even opened it, I know what this is, and he says, "Oh yeah, passports, passports." The oldest is like, "Oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh." Daughter starts crying, and youngest son is just really quiet. And it came out like within a half an hour later that when he heard his siblings saying passports, passports, he's like, I opened it up, and I didn't want to ruin anybody's joy, but I'm like, this is not a passport. This is not a legal document. He kind of he kind of got a little too serious, you know. Anyway, so the day after
Hey,
Christmas,
that
we
sounds
actually,
like pretty good childlike joy and excitement.
oh,
And
it
I mean,
was great.
there are tears involved.
Yeah, we have it on video. It's great. I don't know that we've ever, six of us, particularly with the kids this age, where they have desires, they have feelings about the world, they are creating, working towards vocations which will carry them in different directions. I don't know that we've ever had something so uniquely that we're all looking forward to together. So yeah, feel very. Sickness stayed away from our house, so that's yeah. And the other gift is for Christmas and anniversary. We actually have a sauna inbound to the house that'll be here end of
Oh,
January, beginning
nice.
of February. So I'm very sort of, if you want to dig into another subculture that's very interesting, a culture, and the health benefits, the actually known and studied health benefits of it. So, anyways, we're to that. And that's all. Well, I had a nice hike yesterday with my youngest son. We went out about 10 miles from here, kind of down into a valley, Cactus Flats, but from we did a quick, it was just like 5.5 miles, but it's 2,000 feet, and there's no trail. It's all route finding to get to the top of these granite peaks. So it's wild country, lots of cacti, tumbles of rocks, very much a Joshua tree like setting on top of this granite
Cool.
peaks. Very, sort of evidence of many other people being up there, a few people a year type thing. So us, the jackrabbits, sign of mountain lion, sign of bighorn sheep, though we didn't see any of that. And it was just a good day, a nice day with him, or a half day,
That
really.
sounds great.
Yeah, it was great. It was. So Ben, we'll pick on Ben. Ben is not with us right now. I'm not sure when we're going to see Ben next. Ben came to Jared and I late December and asked to press the pause button personally for him on participating with us here at Bitcoin Reformation Podcast for a while. And his life is just getting busier with substantive things. Not only his work at PLI as the executive, um, but he's teaching some online courses, and even more importantly, his local church, which has well, it looks like they're having a vacancy coming up. And bottom line, vacancy or not, he has been asked to come and help more and bit at the church for the months going forward, at least months going forward. Those were some of the one vocation we have, which we'll always have, are baptized children in Christ. We have that now. We'll have that in the age to come. When it comes to any of our other vocations, we can't always just keep piling on, right? Something got to give. And this is one that he asked to press the pause button. And so we say, God be with you, Ben, but come back soon. We're going to try and work and pursue carrying on. And here we are.
Here we are in 2026. And so today's episode is David's brainchild, if you will, but I think it started from, maybe at least I'm assuming, it started from a text that I had sent to you and to Ben. So we still are part of our little texting thread. And it came out of, I think, CES, which is, just down the road from here. And there was a product that was unveiled there. I'm for spacing on the name now, but it is a water heater that is paired with and uses a Bitcoin miner to heat the water. And thus then you get to receive some sats back, assuming that you're mining with a pool, a mining pool. And this sort of was a narrative, a story, hey, this is how everything is going to be. I remember listening to someone who said there's going to be Bitcoin miners in microwaves, in toasters, in cars, in everything. And maybe that'll still happen someday. But I don't hear too many people these days talking about how they're heating their house with water, how people are putting these things into appliances. I mean, I think, David, you even have a like customer facing Bitcoin heater that is okay and is fine, but obviously hasn't necessarily taken off to my understanding either. And so it would fall under the category of something that was long promised and said about, but hasn't come yet to fruition. And so I'll let David kind of lead us into what he thought we should talk about today with that little intro story.
Yeah, based on how about then we talk about different narratives around. It will not be an exhaustive list, or even if two guys out to have an exhaustive list, they probably wouldn't agree on what list is. But there's some main ones from 2009 till now. What are the different narratives around Bitcoin? It's funny to say 2009 because in 2009 there was one person, five people, dozens, something like that. There really wasn't a community, certainly not an online community. Probably didn't think of it as different subcultures or ideas surrounding Bitcoin popping up. But I am going to start at 2009 because the way Bitcoin came about, I think that's when we got our first narrative. And so I thought, let's Jared and I just talk through some of the narratives. Some we've seen come and go. Some we've seen come and stay or fizzle, as you just pointed out. But then just sort of talk about 2026. And instead of talking about something like price predictions, which is bound to be a fair, plus this is not financial advice. This is, as many podcasts are saying, this is entertainment, and we hope education as well. So we're not going to do a price prediction, but maybe we could say, hey, which of these narratives or new ones do we think have picking power and staying power here in 2026? So I think how I framed it. Does that sound right, Jared?
Yeah, that sounds good to me. And I don't know if you had any plans for necessarily how to do it, but as I went and thought through, it seemed like a good logical way to go past narratives. If there's anything you think is like present, and then hey, here's some future things leading into 26 to sort of shape our time today.
Well, let me start with the first one then. What I suggest is the first one is that Bitcoin was meant to be sound money. The reason I say that is because though the white paper, October 31st, Reformation rather, on 2008, the Bitcoin network came live on January 3rd of 2009, a few months later, very quietly. Satoshi Nakamoto starts mining Bitcoin, sends out the white paper, launches the software, begins spinning those machines up. But here's the thing: when you successfully mine a block, you can mine that block. That's certainly the case. But when you have been the one who mined it, you can also author a little message on that block. And on that January 3rd, 2009, Satoshi Nakamoto put on the first block, which interestingly they call the Genesis block. On that first block, it said something very close to this. I'm not going to claim to get it word for word, but it says Chancellor on brink of bailout. And so what that was the headline of I believe it was the London Times for the day. It was the headline, top of the newspaper. And in this case, the Great Britain's central bank was on the brink of a second bailout. In other words, they once printed a load of cash. They're getting ready to do it again. And so I'm going to say the first narrative around Bitcoin was right then and there, January 3rd, 2009. And I'm calling it sound money, Jared. Sound money, which is to say, with all the other money that they're treating like funny money, they're creating nothing. There's only proof there. Here comes Bitcoin and Genesis block. Satoshi suggests the most important narrative on his, her, or their that day, which was, this is sound money. there will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin. Of course, highly divisible, but still sound money, fixed supply. That's my suggestion for first narrative. What do you think, Jared?
Well, I love the way that that's still true today.
Yeah.
So some of the things that like I've written down for past narratives are things that I think are somewhat either dead or gone or moved on from, or hey, you're really behind if you think this is still real, that sort of thing. But the narrative of sound money is still a current one that has endured through all of the different iteratives of what is Bitcoin in the popular culture, what is it used for, how do people see it, that you even have. I mean, today, not today, sometime in the last month, people were talking about the great debasement trade. I think we talked about that last episode. I can't remember. But Bitcoin was mentioned as one of those assets as part of that trade because of what you just said, that because it's a sound money, that it cannot be debased, much like our currency can and things like that. And so it's amazing that it started with that intent, and whatever 16, well, not 16, bad math there, 17 years later now, it still has the same principles, the same story around it, that it still is sound money. And one of the, I would say that's probably one of the most appealing reasons for people that would find themselves to it today is the sound money aspect of it. If it's not price, like we sort of said before we started recording, last year, Bitcoin did a lot of up and down, but it went down total by 6%. So only a 6% change over 12 months was where it ended. And I find myself rather apathetic to the price. It's not that I don't think it's, doing what it's supposed to do. It's still just a whatever. It's not as much as I want it to be, but okay, fine. And yet I'm still here. I'm still doing what I'm doing because it's still sound money. It's still better than the dollars that are melting away in my bank account, in my savings account, all of those sort of things.
Yeah, precisely. Two things come to mind. First of all, anytime price does go up, ultimately, that is signal. I would say that people do see it to money, or some tangent really close to that. So they're storing it in something that is fixed supply. When you're stuffing more of something into a limited and supply of another, it gets more dense, right? And the price is a signal of density, you could say. But I agree with you. Not only was it the first narrative, but I think 2026, it's going to be part of the reason that those who are orange pilled in 2026 are orange pilled. A book that came out last year, Larry Lepard's The Big Print, which I just happen to have over here on the left, is about precisely that. And we're looking at that. Jerome Powell will be leaving as Fed chair. On his out, we've got some decreases in the Fed rates, and whoever comes in next, I mean, I think Trump has said he wants it down to 2% or 1%. And why would the government do that? They would do that because it makes it cheaper to pay their debts, the interest rate on their debts, and to refinance those debts. And that's all the more important. And the government has also signaled they'd look to spend more before. I think Trump just said he wants to see the next budget for the armed services to be at 1.5 trillion. I think that's up 0.2. That represents a quarter of federal spending just 4 years ago, and now about a sixth of it now. But still, it's just absolutely wild. So all signs point towards more money printing, which is monetary. Which you could, if you were to successfully mine a block today, you could say Chancellor on brink of third, fourth, fifth, sixth bailout. Take your pick. I mean, that could be. You could have fun with your own block. You could inscribe on it, having secured that block. So yes, that's the first one I had. I didn't touch a thing. Okay. I just made my list. It's numbered on the left, but on the right, I put radio boxes and 2026 behind it, and I put a solid check mark. I think Bitcoin as sound money will play a huge part in the 2026 narrative, and very positively so. So I'll let you go next. What do you have next?
Yeah, absolutely.
The Bitcoin narrative.
So one of them that I think is mostly dead, or at least one that people don't think or take as seriously anymore as the main narrative is that Bitcoin is for, call it criminals, or for the dark internet, the dark web. And so this was one that was more popular, I think, before I got into Bitcoin, before I was here. But it was one that, you heard people like Elizabeth Warren talk a lot about in 2022, things like that, when she was sort of leading the crypto army, anti-crypto army, I should say, to crusade against things like Bitcoin. But especially in those days, there was things like the Silk Road where Bitcoin was the accepted currency there. And in some ways, I think there is a sense in which this was used in that way primarily as a permissionless payment source or mechanism for people who were doing things that were less than above board or not in the light, as Jesus might say. But nevertheless, I think that has changed a lot in the sense that both the amount of transactions that happen now in that way are small, but of course, compared to something like the dollar, are even smaller to the amount of, call it, bad things or evil things that happen with the dollar. But even more than that, too, I think criminals have found that because of organizations like Chain Analysis and some other groups like that, even if there's a certain amount of anonymous sending, that people can still track your wallet, the addresses you use, and that it's a very low amount of privacy, if you will, because it's a public blockchain that people can see everything on. And so that's why in the cryptocurrency space, you have so many different coins that advertise themselves as privacy-focused things, because they are trying to focus on trying to do something that they feel like Bitcoin doesn't do well in that way. And so I would say that's a narrative that's really come and gone, that people don't say, oh yeah, so you use Bitcoin, does that mean you're like a drug dealer, or are you doing illegal activity? That's not people's first reaction anymore. And so I think that's one of those narratives that has come and gone. Any thoughts about that one?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to make light of it. People doing evil. Several things come to mind. I mean, if I were to straw poll people, dynamite good or bad, right? Hopefully, sure. I mean, I think you'd get some answers, but hopefully you'd get a fair number of people saying, time out, what are you going to use it for? My understanding of Alfred Nobel and the Nobel Prize is that it was first given to, or was Alfred Nobel the inventor of dynamite? So there's this idea of, any tool can be used for good or for harm. We generally accept that to be true. So why so nice one? And I love what you said about it is a public chain. Early on, when people weren't watching it well, was it used for criminal stuff? Yes. Is it used now for that? Probably yes, but not at the same degree because of exactly what you're saying. A lot more. We know exactly how much is in every wallet. When everybody spends it, we know which wallet it goes to next. We don't necessarily know who owns it. That's part of it. You could long hold a wallet without you as the owner being known for it. But there are privacy concerns. It turns out, as you've pointed out, that the U.S. dollar is much better for illegal activities than is Bitcoin. Another thing came to mind. I'd never thought of this, but as you were talking about it, I was reminded. Do you know what the origins of NASCAR is, Jared? Have you ever heard this?
Yeah, it's the whiskey
bootlegging man.
Stuff during Prohibition.
Yes,
absolutely.
Yes, I mean here again, not probably great. There was probably violence surrounding that. There was crime surrounding that. And yet its origins are so far different from where NASCAR is now. It's a fascinating connection. And again, I don't want to make too much of that. But yeah, there were some early wildcat of Bitcoin. There are people most certainly using a good thing to a poor end this day. That, again, happens with the dollar. That happens with, I'm trying to think, what are the different weapons in Clue? Is one of them a candlestick?
The candlestick.
Come on, it's a candlestick, right? And
harmless, right?
Right, harmless. But it not roll out new tools just because sinful people do them sinfully. that it just doesn't work. We don't treat any other sort of industry or object to be in that way. So why Bitcoin as well? No, I really actually appreciate that as a narrative. I have that on my list as a narrative
Well,
surrounding
can
it.
I
Yeah.
do kind of what you did too and think about 2026 in light of that too?
Sure.
Because I think it ties in nicely that, in fact, the very thing that enabled people to use Bitcoin for these, call them illegal purposes, is the same reason that it's positively being spun for freedom money, right? And
Yes.
so we've talked briefly about this, but I think that will be a narrative in 2026 and beyond, that Bitcoin is freedom money, so that those people who are, call it, under a government that is authoritarian, that is debasing their currency much more rapidly, that they're a group that is, suppressed or oppressed, that they can use Bitcoin and without their governments knowing, without their permission. And it's one of those, well, if that has to be able and capable, then that also means maybe these bad people can use it too. But it comes back to what you were saying, that it's more of the tool that we use and how we use it. But I see 2026 in the future as just more and more examples. I mean, we've heard some stories, but I'm sure many more will come to light in the future about how Bitcoin has been used positively as freedom money in the world, around the world, especially not just in the United States, but all over the world, for people to preserve their wealth, to preserve their purchasing power, and even escape the places where they reside financially in that sense.
I really appreciate that. And the thing I would add on to it, it's not a contra at all. It's truly and sort of an appendice to add on to that. Bitcoin, I think will be seen more and more as an antidote to another new technology that is coming out, that several nations and consortiums of nations have said that they are working on right now, released in limited spaces, but plan to release much bigger and much more broadly. And those are CBDCs, central bank digital currencies. I have to go into that now, but boy, talk about nifty. Just anyways, Bitcoin will be seen as an antidote to that. So how wild that, sure, it had its early wildcat days, was tied to Silk Road, number of other things. I think the sentiment around Bitcoin, particularly for Western people, know of a particular type of freedom, principled freedom, know of like our own Constitution, and want to defend this. Would like for other people to experience such freedoms. I think there will be that counterpoint between Bitcoin and central bank digital currencies in 2026 and beyond. Awesome.
Absolutely.
What
do you
can
got?
I go with the third one then?
Sure, please.
Because I realize I have one here that it fits sort of like nicely with yours. Like there was an initial narrative and now it's even flipped, maybe you could say. And it comes all the way through even to your heating unit that you mentioned. And superheat, I think, is the name of that heat. One of the early narratives, long-time narrative, was a FUD narrative, fear, uncertainty, doubt. And it was around Bitcoin's energy usage. It was believed, in one paper even suggested, I forget which year, but that year has now come and gone. Sort of like the year that came and went with Al Gore and the polar caps melting and no longer being present. But somebody suggests by such and such a year, if Bitcoin not just grows, but continues on and grows, anyways, that it would eat up like a majority of the world's electricity. And certainly it's taking up more electricity today than ever before, but it's hardly been a majority. So there was this fear, uncertainty, doubt around Bitcoin being dirty because of how much energy it used. And now I would say I think it'll happen in 2026 even more than 2025, Jared. But I don't think it'll be a wrong kind of public-facing narrative. But nevertheless, a reality. Maybe that's it in 2025 or 2026 and beyond. Be that Bitcoin is actually taking part in cleaning up several of or much of the electrical grid. And as a single industry, it has been shown through several research papers to be the greenest of all industries. If you kind of lump industries together with their kind, Bitcoin uses more renewables, if that is about. And I'm open to it. I don't think they're all, maybe my bias is this, not all kind of green electrical sources are as green as we kind of whitewash them to be. But nevertheless, I think there's Bitcoin leading to increased human flourishing in some places of the world by increasing electricity generation or power generation more broadly. It's going to take niches of the electrical grid and green them up further. And we could talk about all these. Maybe we should give a few examples of it. But there's an early narrative, fear, uncertainty, doubt over the city to now lots of different sub-industries. And let's face it, all industries require energy. And if they didn't know that until now, they're finding it out as electricity prices go up around the world in many places. They're finding it out. And so to find a technology that comes along and has the potential to up the world by renewables, be readily at hand. It has the ability to green up the balance sheet by decreasing costs or at least offsetting costs. I just think that the whole energy narrative is just a full-on shift from fear, uncertainty, doubt to strength in 2026 and beyond.
Absolutely. I had a similar thing on my list too. So we're thinking about the same, down the same train that started bad. I had it under my current, like it's still a current thing that's happening right now, that Bitcoin is being seen as a positive thing, not a negative thing. So from the ESG standpoint, I think it's Earth social governance stuff, which in some ways seems to kind of be going by the wayside anyway. Previously was viewed as a very negative thing, like David said, now is beginning to be seen more positively. And I think we've talked about how, it takes and seeks, as a Bitcoin miner, you're seeking the cheapest source of electricity possible, because what that means then is you get the most bang for your buck, because your miner is going to need the same amount of electricity, whether it costs 13 cents per kilowatt hour or 2 cents per kilowatt hour. And so if you can get closer to that 2 and away from that 13, it's going to maximize your profits as a business. And so you're incentivized naturally to seek out the cheapest power cost for you. And a lot of times that looks like going to be the buyer of excess energy for these renewables, whether it's solar, whether it's wind, whether there's some cool projects in Pennsylvania about taking the gas from these wells that need to be flared every once in a while, and these big shipping containers they take to each individual well. And so there's projects like that come in and set a Bitcoin mine on it, burns, it actually uses the gas instead of leaking, which is another benefit to the environment, to the earth that God's made that we inhabit. And so this idea of Bitcoin mining as a positive thing for the environment, and also makes like you said, it greens the balance sheet. So if you're doing a project that requires some sort of investment for your renewable energy, if you take that excess power you have that wouldn't get used or would just be lost to the grid and you mine Bitcoin, you're going to recap your capital a little bit sooner too. And then one more on top of this, with all this talk about AI and data centers and things like that, those usually need constant power supply. And that's where Bitcoin is still different even than something like AI that uses a lot of compute power. It can't just turn on and off as simply and as easily as Bitcoin can. But Bitcoin can be a simple turn off your machine and you're not consuming any power. And so it still is that niche thing. It still is that niche market, if you want to even use that way, or maybe it's a solution, if you will, that I think will still, like you said, continue on into 26.
Yeah, awesome. Like, and you mentioned some, flared gas off of oil wells lets a lot of methane and other bad gases escape. The offs are much less volatile to the atmosphere, but there's no economic to do so. It's expensive to do so. You could burn it off and create a little electricity, but it's too little electricity to transmit to city centers without losing most of it. So again, it's just the physics say of something like that it's just not viable to and transmit that energy elsewhere on cables because of the loss. Along comes Bitcoin and says, hey, you've got 5 miles of oil derricks. What if you flared them, collected that electricity locally, and brought it locally to a few containers, running containers inside, Now, again, this is for the environment, and got another line of revenue, Chevron or BP and the like, and it's or I think there's going to be a lot of talk in coming years, hopefully in U.S. life, about nuclear power again. Apparently, yesteryear's nuclear generation is not like the technology we have today, both in terms of size, in terms of environmental impact, in terms of public safety. There's improvements all across the board, and yet we're so highly regulated that they can't happen. But even if we can create nuclear reactors best run when they're giving out the same all the time. You don't want to crank those up and crank those down. They work well. And so what do you do when you put them in population centers and between people in their homes and industry? You've got daily cycles of energy demands. Along comes the Bitcoin industry and says, we could soak that up to where you're not just dissipating that electricity. You're not losing it, which is just bad all around. We can soak that up at different hours of the day. And so those trees, it's just amazing. We're probably not the show, or this is not the show to kind of go into that, but I have listened to quite a few podcasts and read some articles on Bitcoin and energy. It truly does go from to where you're like, ooh, there's a lot of fear, uncertainty, doubt out there, a lot of FUD, a lot of negative sentiment concerning electricity use. To if you can at least do one thing, have people agree that human flourishing in general relates to our ability to harness energy and make use of it, and you realize that that's a privilege we have that other parts of the world don't even have, and so if you their standard of living to improve, much like our own, then we need to actually want for more energy production around the world. But then you can say more generally about all the energy production, we have to green it up, make it cheaper. It's just it becomes so exciting. It's such an exciting area of the narrative. Again, it doesn't necessarily have to do with the price at all, though, right, Jared? So maybe it doesn't sort of kind of main headlines, but it's a very exciting thing. And on-ramps for a whole group of people, particularly kind of the curious science types, right? From serious
Sure.
scientists themselves to I could see some online, particular science YouTubers, kind of smarter everyday types or TubeVinci types, doing episodes within the coming years about how Bitcoin is becoming integrated into the energy sector in a very positive way for the environment, for people, for consumers, for producers, all across the board. So I have to be an exciting, enduring narrative, but with a huge narrative shift.
So let's go to the next one then. The one that we might have a debate on this one or not. The one that I think is somewhat dead, or at least has been transformed a little bit, is that Bitcoin itself, the layer 1 Bitcoin, is a person-to-person daily cash sort of thing. That it is meant to be a person-to-person payments network. Now, we could talk a little bit about different layers. We've talked about Lightning and things like that. But by and large, I don't think anyone believes anymore that we are going to be sending Bitcoin on the main Bitcoin chain, if you will, to each other all the time, mostly because there is this thing called the block size wars, where people decided, the users of Bitcoin, the node runners of Bitcoin, decided to keep the blocks small, which means there's a certain limited number of transactions, how things are today, that can only happen in a day. And there's just not enough space in the blockchain for those things to happen. I've heard it said that in the future, blockchain space will be some of the most coveted space in all the world. To be able to transact on the actual Bitcoin chain will be seen as one of the most privileged things to be able to actually do, because of how rare and how finite it will be, assuming that Bitcoin does what it does. So if that's the case, that it's dead in that sense. Now, again, we're not talking about using Lightning, which is a layer built on top of that, kind of consolidates transactions and then bunches them together into one. But then there is a sense in which still this idea of money that is then used to store value, I think I can tie that together, is a narrative that still exists today. that Bitcoin is digital gold, right? We wouldn't use gold to transact with each other. Nobody's going to Aldi or Costco and lopping off their gold bar to pay at the counter. It's a store of value for them, which then leads me to, I think, hey, where are we going in 2026? I feel like if you would have asked me this in 2024, I would have said absolutely in 2025, if President Trump is reelected, the United States will have a Bitcoin strategic reserve. And so I've been a little shocked, disappointed. That hasn't really came to fruition much at all in 2025. But I don't know. It feels like 2026, maybe we'll get more nation states buying Bitcoin as a strategic reserve asset. And so track with me, right? From person-to-person payments, not so much, to storing value, to so much growing that it's not a volatile thing, that nation states now can actually adopt it as a reserve asset. I think that's a fun little narrative track to follow along. Any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I agree with you. There's some wrinkles in it. Like just yesterday and today, through his press secretary, President Trump has made mention again that he's still interested in coming up with a certain amount where under said amount of Bitcoin transacted in terms of priced in dollars, that there would be gains on it. When
Sure.
you combine that with all of the Square Pay terminals, I forget what that is, 12 million in the U.S., plus Cash App just opened up. Yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting, and yet there's going to be more. There's going to be more consumer opportunity to pay in Bitcoin, but what people won't realize at the same time is exactly what you've already introduced: is that they're not actually paying on the main layer of Bitcoin, but they're paying above it on a secondary layer, which is a perfectly suitable thing to do for day-to-day type stuff or peer-to-peer type payments. I think it's both going to increase, but you're right, it's increasing in such a way that it's not going to be inhibited on the base layer. And again, you and I probably know what we're talking about, a few people listening. And we could come back around to that. But then I'm going to totally agree with you and say, I would just add to the narrative. I think there's just there's waning interest in encouraging individual people to invest natively in Bitcoin. It's gone more towards the ETFs or to getting stock that has a strategic Bitcoin reserve of Bitcoin. Well, that makes sense. That's definitely true. Or is a strategic Bitcoin reserve company such as Strategy or Strive or 21, I suppose is going to be something like that, or MetaPlanet. There's a few of these companies that are doing this, and I suspect going forward, first of all, we know that there's a lot of people in this world with exposure to Bitcoin, and they don't even know it yet. I'm thinking of pension plans in Wisconsin, Michigan, California, a few other places where even though they've just dabbled in MicroStrategy stock, as a for instance, or in some Bitcoin ETFs, even though they've just dabbled in it, their pensioners don't know, don't care. They might come to care at some point. It went really well. They might come, I would imagine some pension firms might start fielding questions at a higher rate from their pensioners. Do we have exposure? Do I have exposure through you to Bitcoin? How do I encourage you to do that? I know our own Ben, who's not with us today, has done that very thing with the head of a particular pension plan related to the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. So I'm with you. I don't think we're going to hit the ceiling on the limited supply or limited amount of transactions on the base layer and drive up those fees here in 2026 because at much larger levels through other bigger entities than just individuals, sort of that peer-to-peer. So yeah, I agree with you. I hadn't written that one down. I really like that as a narrative you put your finger on, though. I really appreciate that one.
Do you have any last word on that one, Jared?
No, I'm good. I think I'm ready for whatever you've got next.
Okay. Well, I'll just actually pick that up off of that last one. I think the old narrative was for individuals to get Bitcoin. I still
would applaud that. If I had a friend who came to me, Jared, and was really interested, and I could talk them into buying it, take it eventually off exchanges when they got enough of it to sing it, on a cold wallet very securely, I would still talk them into it. But it just doesn't seem like we're there anymore. Even
Right.
British HODL, who for a couple of years had this message of get to one Bitcoin. Well, get to one Bitcoin is much more doable at when Bitcoin's down at 18,000 just a year and a half ago than at 89 or 90,000 today, or an all-time high of 124 or 125,000. So that US comes in. It's only going to get stronger, which it works against Bitcoin in this case, with only 21 million Bitcoin rather. Imagine the day that Bitcoin goes to 250,000. It's going to be hard to talk with somebody. It's just going to be another part of our conversation with them to say, oh, you can get pieces and parts. And really the goal is to have more every day, week or month, of this fixed supply. Back to Satoshi Nakamoto on January 3rd, 2009. But where are we headed? If we're not there anymore, where are we headed? We're just headed more towards Bitcoin wrapped in different wrappers. I think these ETFs, people buying stock in companies like Strategy is here to stay. MSTR, of course, Ben Haupt and I have this wager as to which will do better. We have a 4-year wager on it, and it's a steak dinner, so no excited about that. Would $1,000... I forget when we started it this last summer, would $1,000 in MicroStrategy do better than $1,000 in Bitcoin? But like it or not, and I don't think Ben would actually if he was here, Bitcoin wrapped in different things is here to stay. We know that Strategy, for instance, is looking for inclusion in the S&P 500, and on the day they are included in that, I mean, that's just the gravy train of sorts. That's it's funny, in our own 403B here at the organization I work with, 1517, we don't have access into S&P 500 ETFs. They have some similar sort of things. But even if I did, who can say, yeah, I invest in the S&P 500, and I took a few evenings and I looked at all 500 companies inside there, right? That's just not how it works. You're investing in an idea of the hand-picked companies. So says Standard & Poor's, and the returns have been pretty good. So if Strategy gets included in that, again, so many more people are going to become passively invested in Bitcoin, more than they even know. So that's part of my narrative, I would say, going forward in 2026. Global adoption will increase drastically in coming years, but it won't be the same kind of adoption as the prior 15, 17 years of Bitcoin. We're going to have to kind of put asterisks on sort of those global adoption numbers and explain the difference between the early years and the later years. It's sort of like, the LA Dodgers. Do they have 9 World Series titles now? Yes. Is that as many as the St. Louis Cardinals' 11 World Series titles? No, it's not. And asterisk Dodgers, that includes the year 2020 with many fewer games. So I'm just saying, is it really 9 titles, Jared? Is it really not? Sure. Yeah. So I think that adoption rate is going to keep going forward, and that could lead us, if we want to, or if you want to talk about, national adoption, corporate adoption. We've just got different entities who are at least peeking in or even dipping.
I think that sort of ties in with another one that I thought I saw, at least, and that's the difference in how people who invest in it are seen. So I would say that very early, it was seen as a speculative investment. I'm sure there's still a lot of people who would label it as such today, but especially a long time ago, it was just kind of, we're in this for fun. If it goes to nothing, big whoop, no big deal. Call it gambling if you want. But then it became, now you got to be somewhat speculative. Then eventually now it's, hey, we talked about store of value. Hey, we're talking about corporations adopting it. We're talking about people who are having exposure to it without even knowing. But eventually, I think this is long term. This is not 2026. Eventually, people talk about Bitcoin as the measure, as the rate, right? That it won't even be seen as a question of should you be evaluating your value of your home, the value of your car, the value of your entire portfolio that you have in your Roth or your 401k against Bitcoin itself. And so it's the fact that it's becoming a more mature asset over time, that it's lost some of its upside. We don't know for sure, obviously, but it's lost some of that, oh no, this is scary to some people, and have become a little bit more of a, hey, this is just kind of part of the world now. And it's something that most people need to hold, or at least have some exposure to.
Awesome. I agree with that. You believe it or not, we've done most of that, even though I have more kind of listed. We've brought together in groups most of the narratives I've seen. And let me just think a little bit more purely 2026. I do think with elections coming, that a narrative with Bitcoin that's going to be interesting to watch, I don't have any predictions on it one way or the other, is how politicized Bitcoin gets in American life as a sort of a left-wing versus right-wing thing, a Democrat versus Republican thing. Because President Trump has enthusiastically embraced Bitcoin, it just seems in American political life that then becomes the responsibility of the other side of the aisle react 180 degrees opposite of that. Will that happen again? What will its own constituent base think as it does that? And I think this really could come into play a little bit as we look at midterm elections coming up this year in American political life. So that'll be an interesting one to watch. The only other thing I'll put along with that is I've heard people suggest that if and when Bitcoin continues to grow, there will be a rise in public sense, early adopters who have greater amounts of it than late adopters have it unfairly so. It's unfair that they have that. So I've heard that. I don't know that I think that will happen. I guess we will find out. I tend to think early adopters who have it will eventually realize the gains, just as we've seen here, right around $100. And what that means is somebody who rode Bitcoin up from $100 a Bitcoin to 100,000. I mean, that's a great return, right? But when they sold it, somebody else or some other group of people bought it at that 100,000 price point. That's their new ground level price point, and they're going to pick some level up above that they want to see it grow to before they realize their gains. So I'm not 100% convinced of that, Jared, but I will be watching that. When I hear that it's not fair, the thing I want to go back to is like, I'm willing to talk about fairness, but why is it you're fine with what's happening with the US dollar? You seem fine with what's happening with the US dollar, which is truly a horrific thing for the middle and lower class. But you don't sneeze at that. You've accepted that. You plod along day by day as if nothing's happening to you or the US dollar. But now here comes a new system. Has the promise of defending against that particular kind of sinfulness and now you're finding fault with it in a funny way to me. We'll see, Jared. I don't know, but I'll be watching for that in 2026 and beyond.
It'll be interesting to see what actually happens, because like always, Bitcoin the price, and I think Bitcoin the narratives that seem to find and stick with it never seem to be quite what people expect or think it will, at least not one-to-one, right? There usually are a little bit of underpinnings of what people expected, but it never is quite exactly what it is. So anyway, thanks for being here this week with us. I'm curious if you're listening along, you made it this far, what do you think about 2026 and what will this year be like? So whether it's a comment, send us an email, let us know what you think, but we will see you next time as we gather to talk about Jesus, but also, yes, Bitcoin too.
Thanks.
Have a good one.